Tony in the Woods. By Hak Jin Kim. Tony in the Woods. As the sun rises over the woods, sunlight floods into every corner of a forest cottage. In the yard of the cottage, a border collie rises to his feet and watches the door, waiting for someone to show up. Soon, a middle-aged couple appears, and the woman closes the door, shouting, "Tony, your breakfast is on the table. We're going out now." Ben, the border collie, wags his tail hard, greeting them, Maggie and Henry Brown, who have been his family for years. "Good morning, Ben. Tony will get you breakfast. You're gonna wait, right? You're a good dog," Henry says. They stroke his hair and go for their morning walk. In the cottage, Tony hears his mother's loud voice, and opens his eyes in surprise to see if he is late for school. But soon sinks back on the pillow after checking the clock. It's 5, huh? It's too early to wake up. No school here. Great, he says to himself with a smile on his lips. Minutes later, he sits on the bed and looks around his room, which is much more rustic than that in town. The room is simplicity itself without any pictures. But there is a tiny window that plays a kind of painting presenting a view of distant mountains. Every morning when Tony wakes up, he needs a little time to adapt himself to the new environment. A month ago, Tony woke up in the ordinary neighborhood, and had to be at school in time as a high school freshman. He mostly was busy with his schoolwork, spending his free time outside playing basketball with his friends or doing other activities. One day he was asked by Henry and Maggie, his parents, about living in the woods together for several years. Tony was told two things: all the preparations for life in the woods were almost done, and there was no problem as to Tony's education, since homeschooling is becoming popular as an alternative to public school education, so that he had many choices for cyber classes on the school website. Tony in his mid-teens could understand what Henry wanted to do in his life. Henry had longed for life as a mountain man, so he had made preparation by purchasing land and building a cottage. Maggie agreed with Henry by joining him, and then they talked to Tony. Tony didn't refuse their proposal from the beginning, because he loved wilderness like Henry and Maggie. When a house with 3 rooms and 2 bathrooms got finished, Tony's family moved in. Their house in town was held on a long lease, and they began to stay in a cozy rustic residence. Tony puts on boots and walks to the kitchen, in which there are a glass of milk and a pancake made by wild vegetables on the wooden table. He finishes all quickly and takes dog food for Ben. "Hey, buddy. Good morning. You were hungry and missed me all night long." Tony pats Ben on the head. While Ben eats dog food, Tony goes to the shed to pick up a long stick before hiking. From the first day when he moved to live in the woods, he set out to explore nearby hills and mountains with Ben. Since then, he has realized how much he loves a quiet life deep in the woods, looking for things that no one knows. After Ben empties his dog food, Tony calls Ben. "Ben, after you." Ben runs about 2 yards ahead of Tony and looks back to see Tony coming. As usual, Tony walks wherever his feet take him, following Ben, which always reads Tony's mind. At some point, a certain trail jumps to the eyes. Tony whistles to stop Ben at the trail that he hasn't stepped on yet. As he walks forward little by little, he feels that the trail exudes a weird atmosphere. But it looks inviting him with flowers which are blooming all around. Unlike other wild flowers that generally grow here and there, they seem to be planted and well kept by someone. Tony doesn't pay attention to the surrounding plants, and passes them with no interest. He just seems to be interested in what he will see at the end of the trail, expecting something. While walking with Ben, Tony looks at his cell phone and says to himself, "It's 7. I can go further for 30 minutes to not miss a morning class. By the way, this path looks odd. No one lives around here as far as I know, huh? What if we run into a wild thing like the tiger? No, it won't happen. Ben sniffs here and there, prodding next to Tony. Suddenly, Ben stops and begins to hold a thing with his paw. Tony kneels down to see what is in the dirt and lifts the thing out of Ben's paw. Oh, it's a necklace with a pendant of pellucid oval glass. Let me see. There's a golden letter, J, inside the glass. This may belong to a girl. Who can drop this one in this remote place? Anyway, I'd better keep this, just in case. Who knows what this one will bring? Tony puts it in his pocket and thinks of Becky for a few seconds. Who once has been his one-way love, but becomes a friend of him after she chose David as her boyfriend. While returning home, he takes pictures of the trail that he passed to make it easy for him to find the way. As Tony comes near home, he sees that the cottage sits in the warm sunshine, and nothing shatters the morning calm. On arriving at the front yard, he looks around to see if his parents are back from their morning walk. After ordering Ben to stay outside, Tony enters his room and turns on his computer for online classes. Outside the house, Ben pricks up his ears to catch every sound. While roaming around every corner of the yard and the nearby area, Ben seems to adapt to the circumstances that he has to live in his doghouse, which is made by wood due to the confined space of the cottage. A while later, Ben begins to wag his tail as soon as Maggie and Henry come into sight. Hey, Ben. Is Tony taking class now? You wanna play, huh? Run, get this one, Henry says and throws a frisbee. After smiling at Henry and Ben, Maggie goes across the front yard and asks, Henry, I'll get some tools for you? Thanks, honey, Henry says, throwing the frisbee again. Equipped with farming tools and their lunches, Henry and Maggie head for their garden, in which they have spent most of the day. To grow vegetables and edible flowers was the first priority, because they had to drive for an hour to buy some groceries. So they had made a sizable garden before they moved in the woods. 2. As the morning session of online classes for Tony is almost over, Ben appears from nowhere and sits on the front porch. As if he knows his daily routine, Tony comes out with his lunch and Ben's snack. Ben, after lunch we go back to the trail. I have no class in this afternoon, Tony says and starts eating. Ben, are you finished? Okay, I'm done. I'm gonna text Mom where I'm going. Let's go. Tony stands up from the outdoor bench. The sun blazes down on Tony and Ben. A while before they enter the woods, full of shade. Tony, dressed in a baggy shirt and jean shorts and having on a pair of black sneakers, checks his pockets and takes out his cell phone to see the photos he took in the morning. Ben, are we going the right direction? By the way, it isn't near our place, huh? Tony says to Ben. Ben barks at Tony as if he understands Tony. They have walked for an hour and reach the trail at last. The trees around it look dark green in the shade under the hot sun. While Ben is running on the trail, Tony touches a compass app on his cell phone to figure out where he is heading. Ben, Tony's only companion in the woods, comes back to keep step with Tony. As almost an hour passes on the trail without any new things, Tony feels bored, so that he decides to go back home thinking online games. Hey, Ben, there's nothing interesting here. We wasted time. Let's go home, Tony says and turns around. About a half hour after walking back, Tony hears Ben barking behind. But he doesn't pay attention to it and keeps walking. Ben, don't stop. Hurry up. Don't take your time, Tony shouts. A few minutes later, Tony finds out that Ben doesn't come after him, and he goes back to see what's happening to Ben. He sees Ben anchor its feet in front of the tall bushes. When he goes near Ben, he can catch a glimpse of a big rock behind the bushes. A close look at it reveals a big cave that looks like a home for wildlife. But the rough semicircle entrance gives a notion that someone spent time on the cave. It looks odd, huh? This definitely isn't a natural cave. Well, by the way, it's almost 4 o'clock. If we go in there, we'll be late for dinner. Then Mom and Dad will be freaked out, Tony mumbles. Ben, leave it for now. We'll come back sometime later. Let's go home anyway, Tony says to Ben. At the dining table in the kitchen, Maggie asks, Tony, did you go around the mountain this afternoon? Yeah, twice. In the morning and in the afternoon, Tony answers. It means? Oh, I'm wondering. If you're interested in the book about medicinal herbs, Maggie smiles. Yes, it's interesting. But I think it takes time to distinguish between edible herbs and inedible stuff, you know, Tony responds. I bet you aren't ready to teach me, huh? Tony says, glancing at Maggie. Maggie shrugs and says, I'm studying hard, you know. Dad, have you looked around the woods nearby when you chose this property? Tony asks. Yeah, the woods looked nice to me and mountains here aren't high. And this place isn't a jungle. And the chances of you running into bears are slim. Yeah, but you can see some boars. Why are you asking? Did you find something wrong? Henry asks. No, nothing's wrong. I'm just curious. Are you guys safe in the garden from boars? Tony asks, smiling at Henry. Sure. You saw the tall, barbed-wired fence, didn't you? Nothing can jump over the fence. Rather, I worry about you, Tony. Don't be reckless, Henry says, looking at Tony in the eyes. Okay, Dad. Ben is always with me, you know, Tony shrugs.